Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to talk about politics, and I want to talk about Brennan Lee Mulligan, and I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons on the edge of cultural movements and Dungeons and Dragons involving itself in politics. So let me explain what Dungeons and Dragons did recently to get on the front lines of current events and specifically politics. So Brennan Lee Mulligan is a very funny guy, and he is top 10, one of the most famous dungeon masters in the world, right? So he's on an actual play called Dimension 20. I have to admit, I have very little knowledge of Dimension 20. I have not really I tried Dimension. Actually, let's be super clear. I really struggle to watch anyone play Dungeons and Dragons. I find it just makes me sad. I have no idea how Critical Role is able to get people to watch these super long games with these super long campaigns where no one at the table except Matthew Mercer is taking the game seriously, right? I look at the Critical Role players, and it would make me weep after every game if I was Matthew Mercer, because it's clear that he's putting a lot of time and energy in. And I swear, I look at the Critical Role games, and I'm not certain that a single Critical Role player has ever even read the player's handbook, right? Like, the level of that, it is truly a Michael Jordan. The rest of the team, it's incredible. But people watch these things, and people have watched Dimension 20, and Brennan Lee Mulligan is on there, and Critical Role has brought Brennan Lee Mulligan in, and he has dungeon mastered for Critical Role, and I believe he's been a player at their table as well. So just rubbing Brennan Lee I'm sorry if I'm massacring his name. It might be, I think it's Brennan Lee Mulligan. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. But he just rubbed it, like, they rubbed him against Critical Role, and now he's famous. That's the way it works. Like, it's just, Matthew Mercer is ridiculously famous, right? It's incredible. It is truly incredible. But Brennan Lee Mulligan, and why am I talking about Brennan Lee Mulligan? Sam Riegel was there. So Critical Role that's why this matters. Critical Role was there. Sam Riegel was there. Brennan Lee Mulligan, dungeon mastered for, according to the character sheet on comicbook.com, Brennan Lee Mulligan brought Dungeons and Dragons to the SAG-AFTRA strikers, right? And used Dungeons and Dragons to entertain the SAG-AFTRA strikers, giving support to the SAG-AFTRA strikers. Now, first of all, was that wrong for Brennan Lee Mulligan to do that, to use Dungeons and Dragons in at a strike support, right? So first of all, just in case you're aware, like, of course it's right. Of course the actors are in the right and should be paid more and all this. I'm not there with you, right? Like, so first of all, I'm still making up my mind on this SAG-AFTRA strike. And the reason why is they're like, oh, these dirty Hollywood executives. I'm like, I don't know if you guys are paying attention, but I actually go to the movies, and frankly, their entire business model is about a centimeter from going out of business, right? So if you're telling me that these super rich, like studio execs are like holding out on you, just so you're aware, their entire business model, it is openly being discussed if their entire industry will even exist 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? Literally, there is a conversation, an open conversation in America, whether movies are even needed, right? This is a century-old industry, and these Hollywood executives are trying to keep it up. And frankly, the SAG-AFTRA and the writers, none of this is on them, right? None of them are trying to save movies and films, right? Like, and the reason why is they don't care about the infrastructure, right? And so I actually have a lot of sympathy for the studio executives, right? Because the reality is they're under incredible pressure, right? So I'm not fully bought into the SAG, but this is incredibly political. And the reality is Brennan Lee Mulligan, in my opinion, used Dungeons and Dragons to support a political cause, which is pro-union, pro-labor, and anti-infrastructure, right? I consider the studio executives infrastructure, right? Like, the reality is people love actors, But the reality is, there are a million people in line to get those jobs, right? The studio executives, that's not an easy job to fill, right? You literally need to save a dying industry. And get this, everybody's like, oh, they need to give us some of that streaming money. What streaming money? Like, only Netflix has proven this is profitable, right? Disney, who, guess what? They're pretty good at business, has lost has lost billions of dollars in streaming. Amazon has not been profitable in streaming. Nobody even knows where to sign up for Paramount Plus, right? And everything beyond that is like, so the reality is they're saying, hey, give me some of that money. And like, the execs are saying, listen, nobody is going to the movies, and no one but Netflix has been able to get streaming to even be profitable, right? So we don't really know what money you're talking about, right? We are literally right now determining if sacrificing the silver screen for streaming has destroyed literally the entire entertainment industry. So we don't really know if there's any money to fight over, right? And that's real. That's very real, right? But Brennan Lee Mulligan put Dungeons & Dragons right on the razor's edge of this, right? And said, let's get D&D involved in politics. Was it right for him to do that? Absolutely yes, right? Yes. Dungeons & Dragons has always been on the cutting edge of politics, right? And it came out in 1974. Gary Gygax was like, guess what, world? I just changed the way that human beings interact with identity, right? You are no longer stuck with one life. You can have as many lives as Dungeon Masters will give you. You can have as many identities as Dungeon Masters will give you. I can free you from gender, from preference, from personality, from every single attribute of your humanity. You get extra identities, and we're going to interact with identities in new, fresh ways, right? That happened in 1974. It's about to turn 50 years old. It was a transformative moment in human narrative, right? And because of that, immediately, it didn't even get out of the gate before people were terrified, and churches were saying, we need to burn these books. And literally, this year, atheists and agnostics came to burn the D&D books again in the OGL crisis and were successful. There were a lot of digital books burned, right? They're like, cancel your subscription, kill all your, like, we know you spent hundreds of dollars on these digital books. Hey, remember 1983? Let's repeat it in 2023. There they burned physical books. Now you burn your digital books. Dungeons & Dragons has always been on the cutting edge of free speech, has always been on the cutting edge of cultural discussions of identity, from the perspective of gender, from the perspective of preference, from the perspective of class, from the perspective of wealth divisions. Like, Dungeons & Dragons has been massively involved in politics since day one, right? And get this, just look at the official Hasbro D&D Twitter account, massively political, saying specific support for some things and saying specific non-support for other things. Highly involved in American politics, right? So the reality is Brennan Lee Mulligan is doing what's a tradition, right? And the reality is anytime in America you get even a remote group of charismatic, confident, intelligent people in a room, some of them or all of them have played Dungeons & Dragons. And Dungeons & Dragons is going to be in the conversation, right? Because Dungeons & Dragons is always on the very razor edge of any discussion of identity, gender, preference, wealth, class divisions, all of these, right? Like, and it's been there since 1974, and it's there now, right? And the reality, and also just to be super clear, these discussions go deeper in the creation of every D&D canon hardback, and I play both. I play all three. I play CCGs, I play board games, and I play Dungeons & Dragons. And I can tell you right now, the design on Dungeons & Dragons is steeped in American culture questions and American political questions, to the point where literally, right? And I've played video games, and I can tell you right now, it is absurd. Like, there's absolutely outrageous ignorance of cultural changes and political changes in the video game industry. They get away with stuff you would never, like you even hint at at any kind of a cultural or political transgression, and because the people who play Dungeons & Dragons are so smart, and the people who care about Dungeons & Dragons are so charismatic, and the people who interact with Dungeons & Dragons are so confident and charismatic and intelligent, right? You will not get away with anything, right? You wouldn't believe, like, the stuff that goes on in video games is abominable, right? I play Fortnite. You know what happens in Fortnite? They're like, hey, why don't you shoot this pig and we'll give you some points for it, right? Just take your weapon and shoot that pig in the face and we'll give you some extra experience. Try that in Dungeons & Dragons. Try saying, hey, why don't you take this species and just hack it to death and we'll give you a bunch of experience points for it, right? You have to label those things as evil, right? Whereas in Fortnite, they don't care if it's evil or if it's just literally a boar running through a field, right? Like, whereas those discussions are had immediately on Dungeons & Dragons. So video games are played by the most abominably, completely delirious, like, uncaring, unknowledgeable, completely self-unaware people, right? Whereas you get on D&D, like, if you spell something wrong, if you miss a letter, like, people are like, oh, what are you trying to say, right? Like, and so the reality is, and that's video games. Board games, same thing. Like, I play board games and I'm like, it is hyper clear that the people who played this game have absolutely, that designed this game, have no idea that the rules they're making make cultural and political statements. They're completely oblivious to it. Whereas that is not the case on Dungeons & Dragons. They are hyper aware that they need sensitivity readers on every single book with multiple rounds of sensitivity reading, because the most self-aware, most caring, kind, and tolerant people in the world care deeply about Dungeons & Dragons, right? So Brennan Lee Mulligan, when he's supporting the SAG-AFTRA strikers, he is putting Dungeons & Dragons where he is carrying on a tradition of cultural awareness, political awareness, right? That specific to American politics and American culture, right? Because Dungeons & Dragons is an American game. Born in America, made in America, maintained in America, built, it's American built, right? And so the reality is, when he's doing this, he's carrying on a deep, deep tradition, right? And CCGs, same thing. Now, CCGs are changing because CCGs has been completely and utterly infiltrated by Dungeons & Dragons since their inception, right? So CCGs do have some of that cultural awareness of Dungeons & Dragons. But Dungeons & Dragons is far, far out on this, on this branch, right? And so I really think it's really fascinating that Brennan Lee Mulligan. So the reality is, I don't actually support how he's using Dungeons & Dragons in that way, but I fully understand that he is embracing a tradition of using Dungeons & Dragons in cultural and political discussions. And frankly, the other thing is, they make a public product, right? And they're like, hey, buy this product, use it to do what you want. If you want to play this game with SAG-AFTRA strikers, they're not going to stop you, right? Because they understand that they've made a political game. And that is not the case with all tabletop role-playing games. I just read, actually, go check out Coyote and Crow, right? They do not share the same openness. They're like, if you're this kind of person, you cannot play this game. They print it right in the book, right? They're like, if you're this kind of person, you cannot play this game. Do not play this game. Right? And they are shutting down cultural and political speech within that game, in my humble opinion. Very, very interesting, because I think the game was actually meant to be progressive, and ironically, it's one of the most regressive games I've ever seen. In fact, it's the first time I had seen that, where within the book, they're like, if you're this kind of person, do not play this game. What's even weirder is they put it on like page 200 or 300, right? Where if you bought the book, then they're like, hey, thanks for your money. You can go kick rocks, right? Like, we have your money. We don't care. You don't play this game. Astounding. Absolutely astounding. So the reality is Dungeons & Dragons is incredibly inclusive, right? Incredibly progressive. And that's not the case on all games. There are games right now that are saying not all people are allowed to play this game, which is truly astounding, right? Like, you know, like that we would reach a point where people were like, hey, this book is not for you. That's incredible. That is like, we're there, right? But I do think Brennan Lee Mulligan had the right to do what he did. And frankly, I'm excited to see Dungeons & Dragons continuing to be used on the very edge of cultural progressiveness. And Dungeons & Dragons, this is why it crushes every single OSR competitor and every single indie competitor, and none of them are ever able to reach a point where they can even remotely equal it, because Dungeons & Dragons keeps itself on the razor edge of American culture and politics. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What I'm excited to hear is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.